think reservation telephone starts roughly in Partial in the center part of the state and runs all the way to the west in Montana.
So you're saying that they have to spend this much money identifying where their stuff is for people? Okay.
And their volume, they do some days where they'll have 200 locate tickets. So you think about, they went from 4 years ago 10, 15 a day to now they're seeing days of 200. And so they're using their own staff to do it as well as they're subcontracting out. And I mean, they absolutely want to do it. But one of the things that they discussed, which might seem reasonable, is right now there is no cost to companies to do a locate. But if you have to do a relocate, they thought maybe that would be reasonable to ask for a cost. So those are some of the discussions I think that will take place to find that balance. Because you see a lot of companies will do multiple locates, and really, and the company will have to go out and re-spot what they've done at the right time when they actually hit the construction phase. You could have saved them both time and money.
Okay, so you have companies that ask multiple times for the location of a utility for the same project?
Absolutely, they'll come out and they'll ask.
And they don't have to, that doesn't cost them anything, the requester?
It doesn't. So you have a 30-mile pipeline, the company will ask the group to locate all 30 miles, but really they'll only do 5 miles every couple of weeks, and the tickets expire, so they have to come back out. So it's really coordination and communication between the groups.
I had a few questions about the reclamations. The first one, the 448.6, yes. How much of that land was mined and how much of it wasn't?
Sure.
Can you, you rattle off some statistics there.
Mm-hmm. Most of it was mined, as I recall. We just looked at it exactly for you.
I want the same information, by the way, for the next year.
First thing was, there was about 188 that was not
Disturbed.
Not disturbed.
Yeah, the bond release area contained 187 acres of land that was not affected by mining activities.
And the rest was?
The rest was.
And how about the next one?
On the second one, the 1,000. We got about 258 acres of land were not affected by.
There was a reference made to adjusted yields.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, what that
How
is
that determined?
Sure, it's a hybrid really of two yield standards. One for disturbed, one for non-disturbed. And the non-disturbed is a 2-year standard. The disturbed is a 3-year standard. And so by sort of coming up with a regional standard and then applying it to both disturbed and undisturbed, so you don't have to segregate, the standard. It really raises the standard for the disturbed, and then requires the 3 years for all land. So rather than saying some only needs 3 years of statistics, one needs 2, they all need 3. Is what it is.
I guess what I'm getting at is how does one determine what the yield should be?
Well, Dakota uses a regional yield standard. So there's, first of all, there's the pre-mine vegetation standards, the yield standards that you have to gather in the pre-mining process. And then it's applied to a larger regional area. So, and this
it's
is
probably best. It's based on the productivity of the pre-mine soils.
Right, the pre-mine soils, not necessarily that particular square foot, pre-mine soils
in that larger area. So it's the productivity, the productive capacity of the pre-mine soils is in part how that's determined. Then that's adjusted annually based on the precipitation, and there's different ways that can be done. And I think that on this they had undisturbed, what they call control areas, to take in the annual climatic variation. So it's a combination of those two factors.
Obviously, you can't hyper localize it because things are different climatic situations.
Is there an assumption that land that has been mined is going to be less productive, or are they required to?
They're required to meet the productivity standards based on the productivity pre-mining. And when you think about it, one would think, well, gee, that would be very difficult to do, and it certainly isn't easy to do. That's why takes so many years and so many dollars to do it, so much care to do it. On the other hand, when one considers that you take the topsoil from several acres of land and you set it aside, you take the subsoil and you set it aside, and then you remove the coal and you put it all back, there's a pretty good chance, especially in the rolling hills, that you're going to respread the topsoil more evenly than God had put it there, right? So you end up in some respects with a hybrid situation. The other thing is, let's remember that there's, because of the standards and because of the political environment surrounding things like our environment properly and appropriately, there's great care that's given to make sure that they meet or exceed those standards. And we're very proud of the fact that in North Dakota, our coal mine companies exceed the pre-mining productivity standards.
Okay, but just so that I'm clear, the numbers that you mentioned in terms of what the adjusted
Yes.
yield was based upon what the land produced before it was mined?
What the topsoil produced pre-mining,
Okay.
productivity of the soil pre-mining.
And the 448 acres, is that the Freedom Mine as well?
It is.
Okay. And there's a little chart that was distributed about, talks about the amount of bond, or amount of land that's been released from bond.
Yes.
How much land is, oh, okay, I see the answer.
26,661 has been released.
What my question was, is how much is under permit, but I see there's 117,000.
117,000 acres under permit.
Does that include this land that we're talking about right now?
Well, once it's released, it's no longer under permit.
It's a fact now.
And so one of the goals, Dale, when I came in, I mean, in fact, frankly, final bond release was a pretty hot topic, well, my second day here 9 years ago. And one of the goals that we sort of set for ourselves was, can we get to a point where the companies are reclaiming and where we can release the bond at relatively the same pace as it's being disturbed, and we're there. Now, there are going to be years. This is an unusual year in the sense that we had, a very large final bond release for the Glen Harold mine, which is, ends all bond release on that mine. I think you're not going to have that every year. But today we have 1,500 acres that we're releasing. That's quite a significant and quite a large bond release. So we disturb, 2,000 acres probably to 2,500 acres per year that's disturbed. Today, this year we're issuing final bond release on over 4,600 acres. That's a pretty good pace.
And who owns the land once the bond is released?
Well, that's based on different culture and standards of the various mining companies, but private party has to own it because, of course, we don't allow corporate agriculture to do it. So it's usually returned either to a local landowner that has an interest in buying it. It may be auctioned. They may have an arrangement with the original landowners when they first disturbed the land. There are various arrangements that different mines have with different landowners. In some cases, the landowners move away and are glad to get some money for their land. So, but it's always returned to private sector hands, private farming.
Is there a particular time frame where they have to sell it?
I think under the corporate formula, I think it's 3 years.
Okay, so once the bond is released, they have to sell the land within 3 years.
That's my understanding.
By the way, there's really no incentive for them not to do it. All the incentive is there for them to do that.
The natural gas plants, how much, you mentioned 3 that have been built already, and where are those located?
State Line 1, Garden Creek 1, which is in McKenzie County, is operating. That's 100 million cubic feet a day. State Line 1 and State Line 2 are in Williams County. They are, I believe, still under construction. I don't know what they are, but they're probably very near completion. This one is Garden Creek 2, and that will be in McKenzie County. And then the one that they've owned for some time, while they purchased it, because when they were Bear Pond, that one is in McKenzie County as well.
And there was also the Hess expansion project.
Well, there's Hess expansion, which is adding 150 million cubic feet a day.
100 million cubic feet per day. How does one translate that in terms of how many homes get heated by it?
Yeah. Well, let me put it to you this way. I don't know exactly in terms of homes heated, because let's remember, North Dakota natural gas is not just a home heating fuel. We see natural gas as a home heating fuel, but North Dakota's natural gas is very wet. So there's butane, there's ethane, that's turned into ethylene, there's liquid gasoline that comes out of our natural gas. So the methane that we're accustomed to, that's that final processed gas, that is used for home heating. Now, there are other uses for natural gas, obviously, But to put it in some perspective, I did this calculation some time ago, and it really hasn't changed because, of course, natural gas in North Dakota in the Bakken is a secondary product. It is a byproduct of oil. And but we were flaring enough natural gas every day to heat about 1,200 North Dakota homes for a year. So you don't put it in perspective, some sort of a home heating perspective, there it is. But, you know, we've been meeting with a number of companies, as Brian said earlier, we've been meeting with a number of companies that are looking at that natural gas for other uses, such as a feedstock for fertilizer, such as the liquids for ethylene and as either a feedstock for fertilizer or plastics or other petroleum-based products. There are all kinds of things to be done with natural gas, and there's a market for them, not the least of which is, of course, the growing demand for natural gas to generate electricity.
As you probably know, there have been some proposals to essentially have portable natural gas processing facilities at the wellhead in some locations. What is the commission's jurisdiction in a situation like that, or does it have any?
It would be minimal, because our jurisdiction for energy conversion facility that generates electricity, of course, unless it's a wind turbine, is 100 megawatts. And these portable gas turbines that would be on a pod, if you will, that would be portable, would be less than 100 megawatts. So we probably wouldn't have that siting authority for that. To me, the big question becomes, you know, who pays for that? And I think it would be very contractual and very localized, and that would become a part of the expense for the person, the company buying the electricity. I do know that some of the rural electric cooperatives have been working with some of the oil companies to look at how they might participate in that, but we've got all kinds of issues that surround that, but I think it's a wonderful potential solution to the natural gas flaring situation.
Well, there's also some possibility where we just had the wind farm we approved where the turbines are blowing, the power's headed down the line, but when the wind's not blowing, that could be an opportunity to put natural gas peaking plants right there that you could use those as almost like you'd have 100% reliable energy source. So I just, you know, Basin has got a couple of projects in the queue for natural gas electricity. We've seen NDAL have some of those. So I think we've got a short-term solution. We might see some of the co-ops and some of the investor owns building the gas on site before they can get the transmission built into place. And there's going to be a lot of things going on with gas in the state.
There's always the issue, Dale. One thing about generating electricity with natural gas, it requires minimal processing. So this issue of the liquids, for example, you have to have something, you have to have some place for all the byproducts that are part of it, but natural gas generation, you can probably use the liquids a fair bit.
All right. Anything else, Dave? All right. Anything else for good of the order? All right, we'll close the meeting and we'll meet again in 10 minutes for
Something like that. Administrative portion.
administration.
So what are you going to Fargo?
Tomorrow, yeah, in the morning.
Okay.